We're going to move on to another controversial topic right now. The Canadian Human Rights Commission delivered a report to Parliament this week that dealt primarily with the issue of hate messages on the internet and what, if anything, can be done about it. Well, the recommendation that came out, primary recommendation that came out, was to continue to use the Canada Human Rights Act to control this, and also to improve on that act to create, in fact, a statutory definition of what hate and contempt really is. Now, inevitably, any discussion about human rights commissions brings up the issue of what role they are playing, what role they should be playing in this country, and therein also lies a very vigorous debate in this country. Well, we wanted to bring you that debate here with the principals involved, but unfortunately we could not, and let me explain why we could not. We invited Jennifer Lynch, the Commissioner of the Canadian Human Rights Commission, on the show, but she said she would not appear on this program if one of her major critics, ezra11, was anywhere appearing on this program. So the Commission then said that they would offer instead Philip Dufresne. He's the Director and Senior Counsel of the Commission, but only on the condition that he did not have to talk to ezra11. So here's what we've done in order to facilitate a conversation. Mr. Dufresne has been invited. He joins me here, in fact, in the foyer of the House of Commons on Parliament Hill. And ezra11 also joins us from our studios in Calgary. Ezra, good to have you on the program. He is, of course, the author of Shakedown, which is a critique of the Human Rights Commission in Canada. Well, thank you both very much for being here. And unfortunately, Ezra, because of the conditions set down by the Canadian Human Rights Commission, I have to ask you to be silent for the next few minutes while I talk to Mr. Dufresne. And then when we're finished that conversation, I will come back to you and we can have our conversation. Hope everybody's got this straight. Mr. Dufresne, thanks very much. Thanks you for being here.
Thank you.
I won't ask you why these conditions were set up and why the Commissioner refused to be on a program with one of her critics and why you would only come on the program as long as you didn't have to talk to one of your critics. But let's go into the basis of the report. A lot of interesting things in the report, particularly the call for a definition, a statutory definition of what constitutes hate and what constitutes contempt. So I guess it begs the question, how have you been getting around that up till now if you don't have a definition? Because you've been in business for a while.
Absolutely, Tom. And this is a question where we aim to ensure that the legislation is well understood by all in Canada. This is legislation that's 31 years old, and the prohibition against hatred and communication of hateful messages is there since the beginning. It used to apply to telephones. Now, since 2001, it applies to the internet.
But what you're saying is we never knew what hate and contempt was because there was no definition.
Well, there is a definition in legislation, and it was interpreted by the Supreme Court of Canada in a 1990 judgment called Taylor. And that decision imposed very narrow definition on Section 13.
Okay, speak English now. I'm sorry, what I mean by speak English is put this into terms that we can all understand. Nobody understands what Section 13 is. Just let's be clear about what we're talking about.
Well, the prohibition of hate messages in Canada prohibits messages that expose individuals to hatred or contempt. And hatred or contempt means the view that an entire race, group of people, religion, sex is devoid of any redeeming qualities as human beings. So we're talking about the most extreme messages known to language.
Why do you want a definition then?
Well,
if the one up till now has been fine.
Because there is now a controversy in Canada where there's a perception that the legislation prohibits offensive messages. We've heard, as a result of complaints that have been filed against mainstream media, particularly the Maclean's magazine, about a controversial article, there's a concern about a chilling of freedom of expression because of this perception that the legislation prohibits controversy. And many have suggested that it does. The legislation to date has never prohibited controversy. It's talking about extreme, very, very fringe types of messages, anti-Semitism, again, suggesting that another race is subhuman. But there is a perception, and we wanted to make sure that the legislation is clear on its face so that...
Okay, so you're trying to get a definition of contempt and hatred that doesn't mean that you can't be offensive in the normal term of that language. So, okay, so now there's an interesting debate as to what constitutes offensive language, what constitutes freedom of speech, and where the balance is with protection against hate. That's essentially it. Where's this debate supposed to take place?
Well, this debate
Publicly?
is a debate that should take place publicly. It should take place in Parliament. Parliament is going to be the one deciding this question. It is a question for Canadians as a whole. It's a question for Parliament. It isn't a question of the Commission taking a position vis-à-vis Mr. Levant taking a position. It is really a question for society. The Commission has provided its special report to help Parliament. Parliament has decided to study this question in its Justice Committee, and we look forward to this debate. We look forward to assisting Parliament in any way we can. We have to remember the Canadian Human Rights Commission is a creature of Parliament. It is there to fulfill the goals of the Canadian Human Rights Act, fundamental values for Canada and Canadians. But freedom of expression is also fundamental. It is fundamental for the Commission. And when we have seen this debate in society, and we've seen this concern that perhaps publishers or individuals are worried that they can't say or write controversial things, that is of interest to us. And we want to reassure Canadians that this isn't the case.
Well, perhaps they're only worried because of you. And I want to ask you, when you take a look at what human rights commissions across this country do you accept the fact that maybe in some cases you've been a little too enthusiastic, that you've gone over the line, that you've been too intrusive in public life? Do you accept any of that?
Well, I don't, because Canadian Human Rights Commission is an adjudicative body. We receive complaints filed by Canadians. We're bound by the rules of administrative law. So we aren't the ones who are initiating complaints. We have that power. We haven't done it in the context of hate messages.
But you assist people in initiating complaints, don't you?
Well, we represent the public
With money?
interest. The legislation, no,
don't
we
you
don't.
pay money to people, help them with cases?
No, we don't. The Commission is a distinct party. Complaints are filed with the Commission. Some make it to the tribunal. In the case of hate messages, only 1 in 4 complaints have made it to a hearing at the tribunal because the Commission
so there's
is there
no
to screen
assistance
out.
for any Canadian entering this process from the Human Rights Commission at any level at any time?
Well, the Commission investigates the complaint. So insofar as it assists individual, it prevents the need perhaps for retaining investigators on your own. But when it gets to the tribunal, the Commission, if it participates in a hearing, represents the public interest, not an individual.
Okay, but your position is then that in this very tricky area that has got so many layers of nuance and so on, you don't believe that any Human Rights Commission in this country has ever overstepped its bounds at all?
Well, I can only speak about the Canadian Human Rights Commission.
And you don't think you have?
And I don't think we have. The Commission has practices. It is involved in litigation. It has used certain investigative techniques that have been challenged. There is an entire process in administrative law, and if processes are found to be problematic, they can be changed. One challenge has been that it takes too much time before you get a decision, and therefore it leads to a chilling effect. This is why in our special report we recommend that there be a power that's clarified so that we can dismiss at the early stages frivolous complaints of hate on the internet.
And to make clear, on the internet, of course, you can't control the internet unless you want to do like the Chinese government does. So you're only talking about people that you can actually track down on the internet. So you don't want to control it, right?
No, we don't. And in fact, the Canadian Human Rights Act is designed to remove a message from the internet. It's not there to punish.
Well, unless it was put on in Costa Rica or something like that, and you
That's
can't
right.
find them.
That's
So
right.
you've got a pretty limited area to move in, right?
We do, and the internet is broad, as you know. So in our special report, we talk about legislative tools, the Criminal Code and the Canadian Human Rights Act, but also civil society, education. So it's a challenge for all of us in society.
Okay. Just a final question for you. Do you think you'd ever come on in a conversation with Ezra Levant, or are your conditions such that you and the Commissioner would never appear on a program that contains an interview with Mr. Levant?
Well, in this case, we've provided a special report to Parliament. That's our major contribution to this debate. We've provided op-eds, and we will be in Parliament to answer questions and to help parliamentarians, and we very much look forward to that debate in the coming
Okay, it's
months.
too bad. It would have been nice to have the Commissioner on, but apparently your rules were that as long as Mr. Levant was anywhere in our program, she would not participate in a discussion.
Well, we want to help you as best we can.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dufresne, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for being here. Let's go to Calgary, where Ezra Levant is standing by. Now, Ezra, let's start with the substance of this report. They're talking about controlling hate messages on the internet and so on. Do you think that's possible, and how do you go about that balancing act between freedom of speech, being able to offend within the normal civil definition of that, and protection against hatred?